Okay, I'm here to talk about violent video games and what a scourge that is on our culture. And any one of us who's over about 30 years old don't really understand what these violent video games are and don't understand what an addiction is and what it's doing to our children and our grandchildren. And let me just toss out a few statistics. One statistic is that the video game industry is far bigger than Hollywood. Right? When my generation grew up, Hollywood was the big problem. Hollywood's nothing compared to the video game industry today. Video game industry is more than $60 billion a year in revenue. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Here's another statistic to think about. A study revealed that the average American between the ages of 8 and 18 years old spends, on average, 13 hours a week playing video games. 13 hours a week. That's more than 500 hours a year. That's a part-time job. That's an addiction. There's no denying that these video games are highly addictive, and that they're destroying millions of young Americans, preventing them from achieving their potential in school, in work, whatever. Particularly young boys. We read statistics about how girls are doing better than boys in school. Colleges are now almost 60% girls and only 40% boys. And even liberals are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't good. This isn't good. And people are looking around for explanations. Well, one explanation is video games. Boys get addicted to these video games, and then they get depressed. Their performance in school goes down. They drop out of college, all because of video games. What are they getting out of that? What is anybody getting out of video games? Nothing. These images, the extremely violent images, get in their mind. And for many of us, when an image gets in our mind, sometimes it's difficult to get that image out of the mind. And you got little kids, some younger than 6, seeing extremely violent, highly realistic images in video games. That's going to affect their mind for a long time. Here's another study. Children between the ages of 0 and 6 years old, 36% of them have played video games. More than a third of children younger than 6 have played video games. What images did they see in those video games? Well, the video game manufacturers have learned the more violent the game, the better it sells. So these games get more and more violent, more and more realistic. Decapitation, mutilation. Sometimes they'll mix obscenity with it a little bit, so you get a mixture of sexual stimulation and violence. You give this to a 14-year-old teenage boy and let him play hours and hours of that over and over. Okay, some go off the deep end. And I've done a little study of this. After the Supreme Court case that I participated in with an amicus brief, and then I wrote an editorial for USA Today at their invitation about it, and I'll talk about that in a second, I've started to monitor these killing sprees that teenage boys sometimes go on and look beneath the surface a little bit and seeing if there was a video game angle there, and lo and behold, there almost always is. Teenage boy is playing hours and hours of violent video games, gets withdrawn, gets depressed, then goes on a violent killing spree in real life and kills as many people as he can before he ends up getting killed himself. The most famous example of that was the young man in Connecticut, Adam Lanza, who, quote, existence his existence largely involved playing violent computer video games in a bedroom. And he, quote, spent hours playing violent video games such as Call of Duty in a windowless bunker. He particularly liked Dynasty Warriors. It's one of his favorite. And then one morning, he went down to the neighborhood elementary school and killed 20 children and 7 adults, including himself. There was video games behind that. And where did I get those quotes? Did I get those from American newspapers? No. No, when something like that happens, you have to go to the British press to get the real story, because you're not going to read about that in an American newspaper. American newspapers keep that away from the public, the link between violent video games and these horrific crimes committed by youngsters. That's not the only one. There have been many others. Here's a fellow this past year. There's several each year, these killing sprees. Elliot Rodger killed 7 young men and women, including himself, wounded 15 others. By his own admission, he says that he hid himself, quote, away in the online world of Warcraft, a place where he felt comfortable and secure. He did not realize, quote, the severity of how far he had fallen due to the violent video games. He admitted that himself. But none of us heard about this. That's all kept away from the public. The public doesn't see this. It kind of reminds me of what someone told me a little while ago about Ted Bundy. Many of you may remember as the serial murderer, one of the worst in history, would kill young women. He admitted himself that he got hooked on pornography, and that's why he got into that. He admitted himself. But that never got out to the public. And the liberals deny that. They deny that link. Okay, let me move to the case and then what can be done about it. So California passed a law and said you're not going to sell extremely violent video games to young people unless you get parental approval. It's a good law. Same is true for cigarettes. You can't sell cigarettes to young people. You can't sell alcohol to young people. You can't allow young people to gamble. You can't sell extremely violent video games to young people. It's just a small fine if you violate, it's $1,000. This is a $60 billion industry. They're going to fight this. And they fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 shocking decision, an example of judicial supremacy, like we're just going to have another one, just happened on Friday. It's people will be talking about this afternoon on marriage. Shocking illustration of judicial supremacy. They struck the law down and said violent video games are free speech, and the Constitution protects selling that to young people, to children, that there's a constitutional First Amendment right to sell extremely violent video games to 6-year-olds. Terrible decision. Recently, one of the justices who was in that 5-justice majority for finding a constitutional right to it, Justice Elena Kagan, she made a remarkable admission in a speech where she said, quote, I just don't know if it's right, close quote, in reference to that decision. That's extraordinary for a justice to doubt a decision that she joined. That's like a signal. That's like, hey, I don't know about that. Let's look at that again. Let's look at that again. She said it should be the parents' decision. Right, right. It should not be a First Amendment right to sell these games to children. So we have an opportunity to look at it again. We have an opportunity to pass another law. We've got a signal from the 5th vote on the Supreme Court that she is willing to look at it again. There's a more clever law that can be passed than what California tried, and we can do it right here in Utah. And I'm going to talk about that now. What can be done, which would both be upheld based on the decision that's there, and gives the court an opportunity to overturn its decision. So we'd have 2 goals. And I've come up with 7 things, 7 provisions that could be passed that would work wonders in limiting the flow of these extremely violent, harmful video games to children. 1, we could require disclosure on the games. a label. This is addictive. Okay? Cigarette companies have to do that. We can require it here, and there's no denying that. There's no denying that video games are addictive. Studies show it. You can't. I mean, nobody could dispute that with a straight face. Let's disclose it. Let's require a label. This is addictive. And we go further. If a child plays this may cause a child to underachieve in school, drop out of school. It causes them to be depressed, have anxiety. There's studies that show that. Okay, number two, we could require that the games have a clock on them that show how long that game has been played. So that when the parent walks into the room and little Billy's playing the game and the clock shows 100 hours, he's been playing this game for 100 hours. Not straight, it could be accumulative. So the parent sees that right up there in the upper right-hand corner. 100 hours of time spent on this game. I went on the computer here at the hotel. It showed me how long I'd been logged in. You've been logged in 15 minutes now. Okay, let's have the game say, this game's been played for 100 hours. Let parents see that. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Number three, they should have trailers so the parents can see all the violence that's in the game. Just like movies give you a trailer to entice you to see the movie, let's have a trailer at the front of these games that show the worst graphics that's in it. Because otherwise the parent can't see the awful things that are in the game because the parent doesn't know how to play the game. And most parents think it's not so bad. It's not so bad, all the kids are playing this. Let's get some trailers that show you how bad it really is. You'd be, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Let's force them to put a trailer at the beginning of it. It's not going to interfere with their right to free speech. That's disclosure. Number four, let's require refunds. Let's have 60-day refunds. So this a kid buys that game, comes home, plays it, parent sees, hey, people are getting decapitated in this game. I want little Johnny playing this game. I'm going to take it back. I'm going to get my money back. Yeah, you should be able to get your money back. 60-day period. Let's require that. You can do that. That's not a violation of free speech. Let's have liability. Let's have liability. So when little Johnny plays one of these terrible games for 500 hours, then goes out on a killing spree, and it's interesting that when these kids go out on these killing sprees, they're very effective in killing people. One boy who had never used a gun before, but had mastered these video games, he goes into a prayer group with other boys and girls, and he's shooting these other children like he was some trained SWAT officer. He never moved his feet. He never shot more than once at the same person because he's maximizing his kills, just as he did in the video game. Okay, somebody does that. Let's hold the video game manufacturer liable. Let's have lawsuits for that. Let's have accountability. We can sue tobacco companies. We should be able to sue video game companies. How about parental notification? Okay, yeah, maybe according to the Supreme Court, 5-4, there's a constitutional right to sell these games to a minor. Tell the parents. You got to notify the parents when you do it. You can sell, yeah, you can sell it to the kid, but you got to notify the parents too. We have that for abortion. That's been upheld. Let's have it for video games. Gee, let's prohibit obscenity in these games. Most of them do try to link in some sexual element. Doesn't have to be graphically obscene. There's some good decisions that obscenity, which is recognized as something the state can prohibit, that is sort of broadly defined. And if there's anything in that game that tries to stimulate the player in a sexual manner, that's obscene. And let's prohibit that based on obscenity. So those are the points we could do, and I would put them all into the same bill. And then I would add a severability clause. And severability clauses, this is something that's been perfected in Texas, where you put in a very detailed severability clause, and I've got it here, I can read you some of the language, which says if any part of the bill is held to be invalid or unconstitutional, every other part is still valid. If any application of the bill is deemed to be invalid or unconstitutional, every other application is valid. So I'll read you part of this, but we've got this language, and I can give this to Gail and anyone in this room. Severability. If any section, subsection, paragraph, subparagraph, sentence, clause, phrase, or word of this act is for any reason held to be unconstitutional or invalid, such holding shall not affect the constitutionality or validity of the remaining portions of this act. And this has been upheld by a Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. And we throw all this stuff, all these 6 or 7 provisions into one bill, and they got to knock everything out, every word out, to try to prevent it from going into effect. They're not going to be able to do that. So we put these in one bill, and then we put this severability clause there, and we've done a world of good for the children of this state, and then this will be copied by other states and the children of the whole country once this catches on. Of course, the video game industry will fight it. Of course, they'll sue to try to stop it. But our children are worth that. Our children are worth fighting to get something to stop the flow of these awful games to them. And I want to, as I wrap up here, and then we'll take some questions, is I want to emphasize that we've forgotten that state legislatures are co-sovereigns in our system of government, that the federal judiciary is just one branch of the federal government, and the federal government is a co-sovereign with state government. The state legislature does not work for the federal judiciary. Okay, the state legislature does not take its orders from what's going on in one branch of the federal government. Rather, we have a system of checks and balances. And it's incumbent on state legislatures to stand up and protect their sovereignty and their duty to pass good laws. And if the Supreme Court knocks a law down, then the state legislature should come back and pass another one and keep at it, not give up. When Congress has one of its laws knocked out by the Supreme Court, it just comes back to next session, changes a few words, and passes the same thing again. Congress does not typically back down from the Supreme Court, and state legislatures should not either. State legislatures need to assert themselves to preserve the system of federalism that we have that our framers intended. And the Utah legislature can step up to the plate and pass a terrific law to curtail the abuse of children by these extremely violent video games. There are things we can do locally, we can do right here in Utah. Thank you very much.